G'day guys, Solid here and welcome to Bike Banter. This is going to be a video where I take your cheeky comments and just your general bike questions and try and answer them as best I can. So let's get into the video. So the first viewer comment is from Ozark, and he's commenting on my previous episode of Adventure News, particularly on the Honda Hunter Cub. And he's saying, wow, am I late to the party? Well, Ozarks, I'm Aussie, we're late to everything, so it is what it is, mate. So the next comment is from Andrew, and he's talking about my decision process for getting my next dual sport, and he's asking me why I haven't considered the Kawasaki KLX 450 as one of the contenders for my next dual sport. Well, it's a fairly easy question to answer, mate. The KLX 450, while not a bad bike for its enduro purposes, isn't really well suited as a dual sport, particularly that, as you noted, the 5-speed gearbox is very short ratio, so it'd be pathetic on the road. There's no subframe, so it wouldn't be able to carry much luggage if I needed to carry it on the long adventure trips. And also the service intervals. The service intervals are really involved. I think from memory, not only do you have to change the oil, but you also have to check the valves really regularly, and you also have to change the piston rings at 1500 kilometers. So that's just way too much investment in a bike. I'm looking for something that can really do long distances without much maintenance, particularly because of the cost. You know, once you start messing around with the engine that often, it really starts to jack up the cost of ownership. So the next comment is from Bruce, and it kind of sticks with the dual sport choosing theme, and he's suggesting the 500 EXC as my next dual sport. And Bruce, just know that I really did strongly consider the 500 EXC and even more so the 350 EXC. But what finally changed my mind was just how often you have to rebuild the motor. It's 3 times as often almost as the CRF 450L, and I already had reservations about that bike considering you have to rebuild it at 32,000 kilometers. I really enjoy a bike that is very low in maintenance, and the KTM 500 EXC just requires a lot of maintenance. Yes, you can push that oil change interval, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to pay for that engine rebuild, and those things aren't cheap. And I just don't have the expendable capital to justify rebuilding a motor every year or so. So the final comment on what I should get for my next dual sport comes from longtime viewer and friend of the channel, Phil, and he is suggesting the DR650 as its best of both worlds. I agree with you, Phil. The DR650 really is the perfect 50-50 bike. If I could only have one bike to do my adventure riding and my dual sport and single track riding, the DR650 would be top of my list probably. But it isn't my ideal dual sport, it's just too heavy. I've ridden with plenty of DR650s, and when we've been in the single track and the guys are dropping them and me having to help them pick them up, it's not a bike I would want to pick up 4 or 5 times in a tough stretch on a hot day. It's just not doable. That's why I love the WR250R so much. It doesn't quite have the engine prowess of the DR650, but I can pick it up every time I drop it without an issue, no matter the terrain and no matter the camber. It's just a very light bike to deal with. So that's why I'm not considering the DR650. So the next comment is one I get very often, and I just wanted to clear up, and that's guys correcting me saying I'm saying orientated incorrectly and that I should be saying oriented. Well, here in Australia we speak British English, or the Queen's English if you want to call it, and orientated is the accepted term and was actually the original term. So I know in America you tend to say oriented instead of orientated, which is fine, but I'm going to stick with good old British English as we move forward, so you just have to put up with that. So the next comment is one I get very regularly, and that's why doesn't Yamaha make a WR450R and how that bike would be the perfect unicorn motorcycle. And I agree, if the WR450 came out, I would be first in line. It'd have to meet some requirements though. It'd need to be the same weight as the WR250R. It'd need to have the same fantastic subframe, same durability, another great alternator, all the great things that make a WR250R my ideal dual sport. So if it met that criteria, I think it'd be on a winner. Now, Yamaha have a few options with how to get there with the 450R. The first one would be to follow Honda and take their 450F and try and tame it down a bit to make it a little more dual sport orientated. Now, I don't think that will work very well. The 450F is quite a brutal bike. It's very race orientated, and I think any attempts at taming it down won't quite meet the mark when we're trying to get a dual sport bike. The other end is to obviously bore out the 250. You can get big bore kits. Now, I don't think they get enough out of the 250 to make a 450, to be honest. You might get a 300 or maybe even a 320. And I know there's big bore kits out there on the market. I'd actually only need a few more torques and a few more horsepower, just enough to get me around big trucks on the highway when I've got my gear on the back and I'm trying to overtake them. So only a little more power and I'd be happy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a 450R. And the most obvious way they could do this is just designing a completely new bike. Now, this making the most sense as the purchaser of the bike. From Yamaha's perspective, I think this is quite unrealistic, considering how gun-shy all the manufacturers are at the moment, manufacturing completely new motorcycles. Now, there'll be a lot of R&D involved because there is no 450 that they can take that is durable. They don't have really a single 400 that would suit this purpose. So I don't think that's a likely option to see. So I would love to see this. I really do hope to see my Unicorn on the product list one day, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Sticking with Unicorn motorcycles, this is another comment I get all the time and I just don't get the opportunity to reply in depth, and that is that how great would it be to see a DRZ get 6 speeds and EFI? And again, that would be amazing. I would add one more thing onto that. If I was going to buy it, I'd need the DRZ to lose at least 10 kilos for it to be a realistic option for me off-road. But if it weighed in at roughly the same as a WR250R and they added the 6 speeds and EFI, that would be my ideal Unicorn bike. I would be buying that as soon as possible. If it came out before the WR450R, I'd head straight for the DRZ from Suzuki. I'm not really biased to any particular manufacturer. If they make the bike that I really am looking for, then I will go and back them with my money. So I would absolutely welcome a DRZ 400 with an EFI, 6 speeds and a 10 kilo diet. That would be amazing. And the next comment is from Thomas. My quote of "you don't often see 270-degree crank engines." Well, there's so many out there that it's a bit of a stupid comment from myself. Well, Tom, if you actually bother to listen to what I'm saying, I was talking about a 270-degree crank being in the triple motor from Triumph, which is a very strange addition to the triple, and I've actually ridden it now and it's quite a fantastic addition to the bike. It's got twin characteristics down low, which was really missing in the 800 triple, which I also rode. So it's really given the bike some character, but it still maintains that screaming triple up top. So I think it's an amazing design, and it's definitely one you don't often see in a 3-cylinder bike. So again, 3 cylinders, I wasn't talking about twins. So the next viewer comment is from Ronald, and it's a 2-part question. The first part is he's wanting to know my initial impressions of the CRF 450L when it first came out, the video I made, compared to now that I've ridden it. Well, some things have changed and some things have stayed the same. My criticisms of the 450L are definitely the same. The fact that the service intervals are quite short and having that L on the end of the bike is very confusing to a lot of people, as they associate the L with a dual sport rather than an enduro. And this is definitely an enduro bike. It has been tamed down and it's about as close as you can get to a dual sport using an enduro, but it's still very much an enduro, just in its engine response. The vibrations are still there, although dimmed down compared to other enduros, but it's still there. But the service intervals is still my hang up really with this bike. If I was to get it, it is a lot to invest, changing the oil all the time. And I'm not talking about time, I'm just talking about money. Chucking oil into it all the time really does rack up the cost quickly, and being a die-hard dual sporter, I'm all about frugality, so that really does irritate me a little bit. The other criticism I had initially, I think, was the price. that is a criticism that I don't feel stands as much anymore here in Australia, given that it's now only $1,000 more than the WR250R, and you get a lot more components on the 450L compared to the 250R. So I think the price is now justified. And even after writing it and making that last video and talking about it, my decision-making process is still continuing. I am the kind of guy that really overthinks everything, compares all the little pieces, and really tries to see far down the future. And I am leaning towards the WR250R at the moment, purely because the 450L does run rough, and it also does require a lot of maintenance, which jacks up the cost of the bike. And it has me thinking, really, the 450L really costs twice as much to maintain as the 250R. So I could afford a second-hand WR250R and another motorcycle for the price of a new 450L. So I think that's maybe where I'm going to lead to. But as I said, I'm going to make a video going into that in more depth coming soon. And the next part to Ronald's question is he's saying he's got an XR650L. That's a fantastic bike, mate. I'm really jealous that America, you still get those straight off the showroom floors. They haven't sold them for a long time here, although they are desperately in need of an update. And I think that's what you're talking about. You're trying to decide whether the 450L is a logical upgrade from the 650L, which hasn't seen really any updates significantly in the last 20 years maybe. So is the 450L a upgrade from the 650L? I would say most definitely not, mate. The 450L, like I said, it can't hide that it's an enduro bike. It's definitely not made as a dual sport. I think it really was tailored to the American market. Obviously you're from the American market if you got a 650L, I'm guessing. So there you guys have a little bit of trouble getting your enduro bikes plated, whereas here in Australia we get everything plated. So I think just having a plate on a 450L in America is a big deal, whereas here we don't care. We used to get the X with a plate, so it's not as big a thing over here. But to answer your question, I don't think the 450L is a natural upgrade from the 650L. Yes, it's lighter, and yes, it has better suspension, but on the highway, I don't think you're getting anything better. The service intervals, again, it's a lot more involved than the 650L. You've also got to think of the aftermarket. As you mentioned, there really aren't that many really big tanks available for the 450L, whereas you can get some huge tanks on the 650L, which make it a great adventure and long distance tourer. The 450L, yes, Nomad have just announced that they've got a tank available, but there's no real reviews or any discussion on how good or reliable that tank is yet. So the jury's still out. So I would say keep on waiting, mate, or maybe get a DR650. I'm not really certain. I don't feel confident saying the 450L is a great natural upgrade from a 650L just because of the way the bike rides. The 450L just rides very differently to the 650L. Now, given I haven't ridden a 650L, but I'm guessing it's fairly similar to most 650 dual sports in that it likes to lug. It's got oodles of torque, and it's just a very easy motor to live with. The 450L, it's very stuttery down low, it's quite snatchy, so you're going to have to get a Vortex ECU to fix that, I hear, so that's another expense. And it's not quite as luggy as a 650cc single. It is still quite good down low with its torque, but just because of that snatchy throttle and its willingness to rev, it doesn't quite have that tractor factor that I assume a 650L would. So I hope that helps, mate. So the final comment is a cheeky one from Dream Diction, and he's saying, "Solid, stop waving your hands around. Your gestures are just completely pointless." Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed this format. If you do like this bike banter and you want to see more of this kind of thing, please comment in the comment section down below. And likewise, if you've got some questions that you'd like answered in the next episode, do the same. And as always guys, I've been Chronicles of Solid, and I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.